Unit 6, Anthropology, Biology, The Science of Love, page 60. Extend the topic. Part A.
Thank you. Well, let me give you some background before I read. I was inspired to write this book after attending a conference in Miami. There, I heard experts in psychology, sociology, and biology present on romance and how the two genders perceive it differently. Their conclusions? Well, some of the differences are caused by nature and others by nurture. But the big question was how much of each. On that question, few of the experts could agree. Hence my inspiration to research it further and write a book. So on that note, I'd like to read you a short excerpt starting on page 14. On one hand, some scientists make the point that the brains of boys and girls are awash in very different hormones throughout their entire lives. They also note that the left and right hemispheres of women's brains are more highly connected, a fact that usually is interpreted to mean that women's thinking is more strongly connected to their emotions. So, we know that there are some real physical differences behind how men and women experience romance. On the other hand, socialization undoubtedly also plays a role in each gender's approach to romance. Some experts say that the fact that women are generally more comfortable expressing affection toward men than men are toward women is the result of socialization. Another behavior attributed to socialization is women's comfort with expressing fear and sadness, regardless of the gender of the person they're talking to. This isn't the case with men. So how much of the difference is attributed to nature and how much to nurture? Opinions and evidence vary. One famous study, conducted in
Unit 7, Astronomy, Mission to Mars, page 63. Build your vocabulary. 1.
All large projects have to meet bureaucratic requirements. They have to get approval from different individuals, departments, or organizations.
2.
Scientists spend thousands of hours first detecting, then solving potential problems before any spacecraft is given the all-clear for takeoff.
3.
High levels of mental fitness and physical training are essential for all astronauts. Without them, astronauts would be unable to do their job.
4.
As the largest space researcher in the world, NASA has facilities located in more than a dozen cities across the United States.
5.
Astronauts are trained to maintain their composure in situations that are dangerous and stressful. They must never panic.
6.
Some believe that money spent on the space program should be used instead to help overcome problems on Earth. We should first solve things like global warming and world hunger, they say.
7.
NASA has invested billions of dollars of resources, both human and technological, in its space program.
8.
Politicians often argue that NASA's space research is not sustainable because the cost of development programs is so high. They say there's not enough money to keep the program going.
9.
Despite cutting-edge technology, spacecraft are still notoriously unreliable. Their performance in space can't be trusted.
10.
Scientists have already produced and successfully tested a vehicle for traveling across the Martian surface. It looks like a fancy off-road truck, but moves more slowly.
Unit 7, Astronomy, Mission to Mars, page 65. Try it out.
So there are a couple of things to consider. To start with, there's the cost. Space exploration is notoriously expensive, and that raises at least two important and related questions. First, should we really give priority to expensive space projects when we have more immediate problems to solve here on our own planet? I'm talking about a lack of schools and good health care and starving populations, to name a few. Secondly, Why aren't the billions of dollars invested in space projects used to solve Earth's environmental challenges? In other words, if we invest in solving Earth's problems, then we eliminate one of the main arguments for space exploration: colonization. Besides, that solution may be decades, if not centuries, away anyway. Okay, so that's cost. Next is the inherent danger of space travel. Every time we send astronauts into space.
Unit 7, Astronomy, Mission to Mars, pages 66 and 67. Listen for main ideas and listen for details.
We all know that space travel is dangerous. But despite the dangers highlighted by the 2 space shuttle tragedies and all the problems that have beleaguered the International Space Station, our curiosity and desire to explore the universe is alive and well. Just witness China, Japan, and Europe's new space programs. The initial spirit of the Apollo missions of the 60s and 70s hasn't gone away. Far from it. And as I'm sure many of you have thought about, that spirit of exploration isn't just the result of romantic notions of space travel and discovering life on other planets. I hate to say it, but it reflects a growing realization that at some point in the future, and it may be closer than we think, we'll have to colonize other planets. Why? Out of necessity, because as Earth's resources run out, and if our climate continues to change, life here simply won't be sustainable. So, with that in mind, I'd like us to consider the planet Mars as a contender for a possible space colony. And I'd like to outline some of the obstacles that would need to be overcome if we're going to send astronauts to Mars to get things started. So far, only robots have been sent. I'm going to look at 3 obstacles. 1, designing and building a spacecraft that could get astronauts to Mars in one piece. 2, an effective method of propulsion. And 3, the supply of water, fuel, air, and food needed. First, let's look at the design of the spacecraft. Well, right away, scientists know that a winged aircraft like the space shuttle isn't an option. Why? Because the Martian atmosphere is just too thin. The wings wouldn't support the shuttle because they wouldn't get enough lift from the air. Result, the craft would simply plummet to the ground. Plus, even on short trips, the shuttle is beginning to look pretty unreliable. So, what's the alternative? Okay, well, it looks as though some kind of capsule, like the ones used in the Gemini and the Apollo programs, is a real possibility. These capsules prove to be strong and safe, particularly during the critical and very dangerous first and last 100 miles of space missions. In fact, work is already being done to develop a capsule-like crew transfer vehicle to carry astronauts to and from the International Space Station. Are you with me? Well, then let's move on to the second challenge, namely propulsion. You've got your spacecraft. Now, how do you power it all the way to Mars and back? Whatever power source you use, it needs to be reliable, safe, and fast. After all, the astronauts don't want to spend any longer than necessary in such a small vehicle, would you? Plus, the longer they're in deep space, the longer they're exposed to dangerous radiation. So, what are the options? Well, there are 3 options, but none are perfect. The first option is an ion propulsion engine. Now, for this kind of engine, a portable nuclear reactor heats charged gas and then fires it out of the rear of the spacecraft. That's ion propulsion. Do you know what I mean? The main advantage of this kind of engine is that it can accelerate the craft to very high speeds. The disadvantage is that it's slow to accelerate, and as we've seen, time is important and needs to be minimized on such a long journey. The second option is nuclear thermal propulsion. This kind of engine uses a nuclear reactor to heat propellant and blast it out of the engine nozzle. Are you following? Advantage, this system gets the craft moving much faster. Disadvantage, it's heavier and worries environmentalists who are concerned about a possible nuclear disaster before the rocket even leaves the atmosphere. The third possible option is a plasma propulsion rocket. Now, this kind of engine is currently being developed by NASA and can get astronauts to Mars in just 40 days. Very impressive. This system uses magnets and gas to produce acceleration. There are no obvious disadvantages except that it will take several more years to develop. A bigger problem than either the spacecraft or propulsion method, though, is the water, fuel, air, and food a mission to Mars would require. Unlike the Apollo trips, which lasted a maximum of 12 days, a round trip to Mars would take about 14 months. You then have to add to that another 18 months on the planet itself, waiting for the next moment when the positions of the Earth and Mars would allow for a return home. So you see, in total, a trip to Mars would take nearly 3 years. This presents a big problem for scientists who need to minimize the weight while also ensuring that the astronauts have the water, fuel, air, and food they need. And they can't simply build a larger ship to carry all the cargo, as this would require a rocket so large it would probably be impossible to launch. So, what are the alternatives? One possibility would be to manufacture a lot of what's needed on Mars itself rather than here on Earth. Detecting water on the planet in advance would be essential for this option. For starters, the water, once purified, could be used for drinking and bathing. And what's more, the hydrogen and oxygen that make up the water could be used to propel the liquid fuel engines of the ship for the return to Earth. Of course, astronauts would need to have a facility to manufacture the fuel, but assuming that that could be done, then they could fill up the fuel tanks and return home. Do you see where I'm going with this? The oxygen could also be used to create and maintain a breathable atmosphere on Mars. And the thing is, once you've come up with a solution for the water, fuel, and air problems, you've pretty much also come up with a solution to the food problem. After all, if you're able to produce these things on Mars, then throw sunlight into the mix and you've got practically all you need to grow food. So you can see that although there are plenty of ifs and buts, here's a neat solution to a number of the key problems, right? To sum up then, the goal of colonizing the red planet is almost within reach, it seems, but like I said, there are lots of ifs and buts, and it'll take time. I'd say that perhaps the greatest obstacle of all is something I haven't mentioned, and that's the political and bureaucratic one. While the technical obstacles might be overcome, I suspect that the political and bureaucratic one won't be so easy.
Unit 7, Astronomy, Mission to Mars. Page 68. Talk about the topic. Parts A and B.
As I see it, this whole idea of traveling to other planets and setting up colonies is based on one big assumption.
What's that? That we'll actually come up with the technology to do it?
No, she's making the assumption that Earth is no longer going to be inhabitable someday, that we'll have to start living on other planets. So why do we assume that?
Well, climate change, pollution, overpopulation, war.
Exactly. And people keep living longer and longer, so eventually we're going to have to go somewhere else. We won't have a choice.
You guys are a bunch of fatalists.
Or realists.
No, come on. She's also said that, that humans have a desire to explore, the human spirit of exploration.
Sure, I guess so.
So does anyone want to review the lecture? The design of the spacecraft, the types of propulsion, any of that?
It's kind of a hard lecture.
No, it's not that hard. It's just basic problem solving. It's not rocket science.
Yes, it is rocket science.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right, it is.
Unit 7, Astronomy, Mission to Mars. Take the unit test. Listen to each question. Circle the letter of the correct answer. 1.
Why do we need to colonize other planets?
2.
What 3 main obstacles of a mission to Mars did the speaker cover?
3.
Why is a capsule preferable to the space shuttle for a trip to Mars?
4.
What is the main advantage of a plasma propulsion rocket?
5,
Why would a Mars mission probably take longer than the Apollo missions did?
6,
The speaker mentions two uses for the oxygen and hydrogen that would come from water detected on Mars. What are they? Choose two answers.
7,
What problem does having water, air, and sunlight solve?
8,
What does the speaker feel might be the most difficult problem to overcome for a Mars mission?
9,
The speaker says there are lots of ifs and buts involved in getting to Mars. What does she mean?
10,
What is the main idea of the lecture?
Unit 7, Astronomy, Mission to Mars, page 70. Extend the topic. Part A.
Michael, what would you say to those people, often politicians, who argue that space exploration is an unnecessary extravagance, that the huge sums of money invested in space projects could be better spent on schools, hospitals, and poverty issues?
Well, I'd say this. It's a fact that exploration is an important survival strategy in evolution. Species migrate to find new food sources and safe habitats. They also migrate when population pressures and environmental factors force them to. Just look at endangered species like polar bears. Increasingly, they're showing up in human settlements, which are not natural to them. But they've got no choice. As their environment is shrinking, so too are their natural food sources.
So, are you suggesting that the same pressures or factors will eventually force the human species to look for new habitats, new worlds, in order to survive?
That's exactly what I'm saying. But that's not the only argument for space exploration. There's also what I call the curiosity factor. You see, humans have an intellectual urge to explore the unknown. In the past, that's meant Mount Everest, the polar caps, the Americas, and so on. In the 21st century, the ultimate frontier for exploration is space. Satellites and so on can only tell us so much. And so if we really want to find out about other worlds, we've got to go there. It's as simple as that.
Unit 8, Political Science, Big Brother and the Surveillance Society. Page 73. Build your vocabulary. 1,
Civil liberties. Civil liberties are the rights and freedoms people have in society.
2,
Commercial. Commercial means having to do with business or trade.
3,
Composite. Composite means made up of different parts or materials.
4,
Controversial. Something that is controversial causes a lot of disagreement.
5,
Deterrent. A deterrent is a way of stopping people from doing something.
6,
Security. Security refers to measures taken by agencies to protect us.
7,
Sophisticated. If something is sophisticated, it's advanced or complex.
8,
Suspected. Somebody who is suspected is believed to be responsible for doing something wrong.
9,
Techniques. Techniques are particular methods or ways of doing something.
10,
Via. Via means through, by, or by way of. For example, she flew from Prague to New York via London.
Unit 8, Political Science, Big Brother and the Surveillance Society. Page 75. Try it out.
Now let's look at figures. A report by the New York Civil Liberties Union entitled Who's Watching claims that there were a total of 2,397 surveillance cameras in all of Manhattan 10 years ago, and that now there are that many cameras in just one area, Greenwich Village and Soho. Apparently, the cameras have been a highly effective crime-fighting tool, reducing crime in the area by more than a third. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority now plans to spend up to $250 million on cameras for the city's subway system. And the New York City Police Department has requested funding for about 400 digital video cameras to help combat robberies and burglaries. Additionally, it has received $9.8 million from the Federal Department of Homeland Security to help create a linked system of cameras that can be operated from a control center. Surveillance Camera Players, a New York City-based anti-camera group, is concerned by these developments. They've quoted camera growth rates of 300, 500, and even 1,400%, depending on the neighborhood. Those are really substantial increases.
Unit 8, Political Science, Big Brother and the Surveillance Society, pages 76 and 77. Listen for main ideas and listen for details.
One controversial aspect of civil liberties we've not touched on yet is surveillance. Let's start with a definition so we know what we're talking about. Surveillance is the act of carefully watching a person or place, especially one that's suspected. Well, I'm sure we all have our own opinions on this. Civil liberties groups in most countries are concerned that we're becoming a so-called surveillance culture, that in the name of national and personal security, national governments are obtaining detailed information on their citizens and tracking their movements, internet use, financial transactions, and so on. And it's not just the government. Today, it's possible for savvy private organizations to get information on individuals from different sources and build a kind of composite picture, a profile, if you will. Some people think that this is fine if it helps the government or if their local supermarket knows their shopping habits. They shouldn't have anything to hide, right? But most people don't like it. They feel they've become part of an Orwellian Big Brother culture, that it's a gross intrusion of privacy. Are they right? Well, you can judge for yourselves, because I'm going to take you through some of the surveillance mechanisms that are out there. We'll start by looking at a few of the more familiar ones, and then move on to a more recent and technically sophisticated method. First up, cameras. Today, these are everywhere. Closed-circuit TV cameras are in stores monitoring shoplifters, in cash machines identifying fraud gangs, and on public transport watching vandals and thugs. But of course, they're also watching perfectly ordinary, innocent people like you and me, going about their daily lives completely unaware that they're being monitored. You know, today in the US, for example, there are probably upwards of 6 million surveillance cameras. In New York City alone, they've increased 50% in the past few years. And in Britain, that figure is 4.5 million cameras. That's one camera for every 14 people, recording each citizen up to 300 times a day. Then there are traffic-based cameras, monitoring vehicles via their registration numbers. Right now, the UK government is considering recording all car journeys taken on main roads as a deterrent to terrorism and crime generally. These cameras are being used way beyond their original purpose. It's downright invasive. Cell phones have given the authorities another useful surveillance tool. Records of incoming and outgoing calls can be checked and used to solve crimes. That's right, just like in the movies. And something I didn't know, cell phone users can be tracked using a system called triangulation. This is when a cell phone's communication with different cell phone towers is used to locate the user's position. And seeing as these days almost all of us have one of these phones, what's there to stop security services from checking on any one of us? Then we have credit card transactions. We're all familiar with this one, I'm sure. Every time we use a credit or debit card, we're making an announcement of where we are, how much we're spending, and on what. Again, useful for crime busting when, say, unusually large amounts of money are suddenly spent uncharacteristically. But do we really want people to know this stuff? Do we want anyone having access to our financial records? Okay, let's look at one of the more sophisticated surveillance techniques. Biometric facial recognition, which uses computer programs to analyze images of human faces for identification purposes. And they do it by taking an image, say from a photo or video frame. Then they measure facial characteristics, like the distance between your eyes and the length of your nose, for instance. Then they create a template, which the software can compare with another image, like of a person going through airport security. If there's a match, then hey, presto, that person gets pulled aside for questioning. They've got this system operating at a number of airports. It's also been used at major sporting events, like the Super Bowl, where pictures were taken of every person entering the stadium and then compared against a database. Now, all the instances of surveillance I've mentioned are products of the digital age, of technology that's now so easily available that it's just too simple and tempting for security agencies and commercial organizations not to take advantage of it. And here's the catch. Just to function in today's world requires us increasingly to expose ourselves to these threats to our privacy. We basically have no choice. Let's face it. How many of us these days can really manage without a credit card, an ID card, email, or a cell phone? It's almost as if, well, if we want to have these things, then we have to accept the surveillance that goes with them, right? Now, I'm no conspiracy theorist, but like many people, I don't believe all this surveillance is for our own good. I don't believe that those of us who have nothing to hide have nothing to fear. So it's reassuring that there are organizations out there protecting the rights of ordinary citizens like you and me. Let me wrap up with a quote from Mark Rotenberg, president of the Electronic Privacy Information Center, or EPIC, who says that the kind of open-ended surveillance we are now seeing is, quote, the digital electronic equivalent of allowing police to go through your home without a warrant. Now that's a sobering thought, wouldn't you say?
Unit 8, Political Science, Big Brother and the Surveillance Society. Page 78. Talk about the topic. Parts A and B.
So this surveillance lecture was pretty controversial, huh?
Yeah, like she said at the end, that's a sobering thought, wouldn't you say?
Well, I don't think any of us would disagree with her. I mean, she said not all surveillance is for our own good, right?
Yeah. But I have a question. She says something like Orwellian. What is that?
Orwellian. Yeah, she's talking about George Orwell. He wrote a book called 1984. It's about the surveillance society. In that book, they coined the expression, Big Brother's watching you.
Yeah, but I don't think it's that bad just yet. I think she's exaggerating a little bit. I don't think that Big Brother is watching over us all the time.
Okay, maybe not all the time, but I mean, should there be some sort of limit to it? I mean, is it really all for our own good or for our own safety?
Well, like when I ride the subway at night and I know that there's a video camera on the train, I feel safer. So for me, I mean, it's fine with me.
Well, of course, some of it is useful, but a lot of it is intrusive. Like the traffic cameras that feed to the internet site. Many of them can look into people's home and you can see everything.
Wow, so like everything about you can instantly be on the internet?
Yes.
Wow, that is totally wrong.
So, in general, we all agree that some surveillance is necessary, but not all surveillance is good.
Say so?
Yeah, in a nutshell.
More or less, that's it.
Okay, so can we say that we're all on the same page for this? Okay, let's move on. What's next?
Unit 8, Political Science, Big Brother and the Surveillance Society. Take the unit test. Listen to each question. Circle the letter of the correct answer. 1.
How do most people feel about surveillance?
2.
Which topics does the speaker not talk about? Choose 2 answers.
3.
What does the speaker mean by a Big Brother culture?
4.
Why does the speaker mention that there are 4.5 million cameras in the UK?
5.
Why is the UK government considering recording all car journeys?
6.
What can alert the authorities to credit card crime?
7.
Which phrase best describes biometric facial recognition?
8.
What is the speaker's opinion about threats to our privacy?
9.
Which of these ideas would the speaker strongly support?
10.
Mark Rotenberg describes surveillance today as open-ended. What does he mean?
Unit 8, Political Science, Big Brother and the Surveillance Society. Page 80. Extend the topic. Part A.
The man known as the Unabomber was sentenced today in Sacramento, California. Following a 17-year-long manhunt, Theodore Kaczynski, a graduate of Harvard and one-time Berkeley professor, received 4 life terms in prison, plus an additional 30 years. Kaczynski sent bombs through the mail, killing 3 people and injuring 29 others. He has acknowledged responsibility for 16 bombings between 1978 and 1995. In what has become known as the Unabomber Manifesto, a document he named Industrial Society and Its Future, Kaczynski argued that his actions were a necessary, if extreme, tactic designed to draw attention to what he believes are the dangers of modern technology. His bombs targeted universities and airline companies, organizations he associated with the development and application of the kind of technology he resented. The Unabomber has been the target of one of the most expensive investigations in the FBI's history. And of course, one of the most surprising aspects of the case is that the eventual breakthrough came when Kaczynski's own brother David provided the police with evidence strongly implicating Kaczynski. A plea bargain saved Kaczynski from a trial and a death sentence. With Kaczynski in prison, it's hoped that closure can be brought to what has been a drawn-out and frustrating case for police. Our next story concerns...
End of CD2. The audio program continues on CD3.